Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Madison Reynolds' corner office, each droplet creating intricate patterns as it raced down the glass. 28 floors above the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, she sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her tired features. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with whatever pen she'd grabbed first, and her oversized sweater hung loosely over her petite frame. The half-empty coffee cup beside her had gone cold hours ago, but Madison barely noticed. When inspiration struck, everything else faded into background noise. She was a successful freelance graphic designer, the kind who could transform a simple logo into a work of art that spoke to souls. Her clients ranged from small startups to Fortune 500 companies, but tonight, she was working on something special. A nonprofit organization that helped homeless veterans needed a complete rebrand, and Madison had volunteered her services for free. The cause hit close to home. Her father had served 3 tours overseas before settling into civilian life. Her stomach growled loudly, breaking through her concentration. Madison glanced at the clock in the corner of her screen and gasped. 11:30 p.m. She'd been working for nearly 14 hours straight, surviving on nothing but coffee and determination. Her last meal had been a granola bar around noon, hastily consumed between client calls. Madison reached for her phone, scrolling through delivery apps with bleary eyes. Most restaurants had closed hours ago, but a small Italian place called Tony's Kitchen was still taking orders. She selected chicken parmesan with a side of garlic bread, added a generous tip to compensate for the late hour, and placed the order. The estimated delivery time was 45 minutes, which meant she could squeeze in a bit more work before taking a much-needed break. She dove back into her design, adjusting color palettes and tweaking typography. The organization's mission deserved something powerful, something that would make people stop scrolling and actually pay attention. Madison had always believed that good design could change the world, one pixel at a time. 47 minutes later, a knock echoed through her office. Madison saved her work and stretched, her joints protesting after hours of hunching over her desk. She padded across the hardwood floor in her fuzzy socks, already reaching for her wallet. "Coming," she called out, fumbling with the multiple locks on her door. Living alone in a city like Chicago meant taking security seriously, even on the 28th floor of a secure building. She swung the door open, expecting to see a tired delivery driver ready to hand over her food and disappear into the rainy night. Instead, she found herself staring at a man who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was perfectly styled despite the storm outside. His jawline could cut glass, and his blue eyes held an intensity that made Madison's breath catch. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, though it was currently damp from the rain. In his hands, he held a familiar Tony's Kitchen bag. Madison blinked, confusion clouding her tired mind. "You're not what I expected from a delivery driver," she said, then immediately felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I mean, not that there's anything wrong with how delivery drivers look. I just thought you'd be more casual, you know?" The man's lips curved into an amused smile. "Bad night to be working late," he said, his voice deep and warm like expensive whiskey. "Figured you could use this." He held up the bag, and the aroma of garlic and oregano made Madison's stomach growl audibly. "Oh my God, yes," she breathed, reaching for the bag. "You have no idea how hungry I am. Thank you for coming out in this weather. It's absolutely awful." As she took the bag from him, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Madison's system, and she found herself looking up into those impossibly blue eyes. There was something about him that seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, pulling out her wallet. I already added a tip through the app, but honestly, this deserves more. Driving in this storm must have been terrible. The man studied her for a moment, and Madison could swear she saw something shift in his expression. "Don't worry about it," he said finally. "Just glad I could help someone who's clearly working harder than they should be." Madison tilted her head, puzzled. "That's really sweet, but I can't let you pay for my food. That's not how this works." "Consider it a random act of kindness," he replied, that mysterious smile returning. "Though I have to ask, what's keeping you up this late? Big deadline?" Madison found herself relaxing despite the unusual situation. There was something about this man that put her at ease, even though everything about him screamed expensive and out of her league. "Non-profit rebrand," she explained, gesturing toward her cluttered office behind her. "I'm a graphic designer, and I'm doing some pro bono work for an organization that helps homeless veterans. The presentation is tomorrow morning, and I want it to be perfect." Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe? Or admiration? "That's incredible," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Madison's heart skip. Not many people would sacrifice their sleep for work they're not even getting paid for. "Some things are more important than money," Madison replied automatically, then realized how that might sound to someone who was literally working a delivery job. Not that there's anything wrong with working for money. Everyone needs to eat, and you're providing a valuable service and— "Relax," the man said, chuckling. "I understand what you meant. It's refreshing to meet someone who thinks that way." Madison felt her cheeks warm again. There was something about the way he looked at her, like she was the most interesting person he'd encountered in ages. It was flattering and terrifying at the same time. "I should let you get back to your other deliveries," she said reluctantly. "The food's probably getting cold, and I'm sure you have other hungry people waiting." "Actually," he said, glancing at his watch, "my shift's over. This was my last delivery." He paused, seeming to consider something. "I know this might sound strange, but would you mind if I waited a few minutes? The storm's getting worse, and I'd rather not drive in it right now." Madison hesitated for a fraction of a second. Every safety lesson her parents had ever taught her screamed that inviting a stranger into her apartment was dangerous. But something about this man felt different. Safe. And the storm outside was indeed getting worse. She could hear the wind howling through the building. "Of course," she found herself saying. "Come in. I can make some coffee if you want something warm." As he stepped into her apartment, Madison caught a whiff of his cologne, expensive, sophisticated, and completely at odds with his supposed profession. But she pushed the thought aside, too tired and too charmed by his unexpected kindness to overanalyze. "This is beautiful," he said, taking in her space. Madison's apartment was her sanctuary, a carefully curated blend of modern and vintage pieces, with her artwork adorning the walls and plants bringing life to every corner. "Thank you," she said, suddenly self-conscious about the scattered papers and empty coffee cups that betrayed her workaholic tendencies. "It's a bit of a mess right now. I've been living here for 3 years, and it still doesn't feel quite finished." "I think it's perfect," he said, and the way he said it made Madison believe he actually meant it. She busied herself with making coffee, stealing glances at her unexpected guest as he examined her portfolio pieces on the wall. He seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking thoughtful questions about her design process and the stories behind various projects. As the coffee brewed and the storm raged outside, Madison found herself thinking that this was either the beginning of something wonderful or the plot of a horror movie. But as she watched this mysterious delivery driver admire her art with obvious appreciation, she decided she was willing to take the risk. After all, how dangerous could a man be who delivered food in designer suits and paid for strangers' meals? The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling Madison's apartment with the rich aroma of freshly brewed beans. She pulled 2 mismatched mugs from her cabinet, one a souvenir from a college trip to Paris, the other a promotional mug from a local radio station, and tried to ignore how surreal this situation had become. "Cream or sugar?" she called over her shoulder, acutely aware that she was making coffee for a delivery driver, whose name she didn't even know, at nearly midnight in the middle of a thunderstorm. "Black is fine," he replied, his voice carrying easily across her open-concept living space. "I've learned to appreciate coffee in its purest form." Madison poured 2 steaming cups and turned to find him standing near her desk, studying the non-profit design she'd been working on. His expression was serious, almost reverent, as he took in the mock-up spread across her workspace. "This is really something," he said softly. "The way you've incorporated the flag elements without making it cliché, it's brilliant." Madison felt a warm flush of pride as she handed him his coffee. "You have a good eye. Most people don't notice the subtle details like that." She settled onto her couch, tucking her legs beneath her. "Are you interested in design?" He joined her on the couch, maintaining a respectful distance. "I appreciate good work when I see it. This isn't just design, it's storytelling." "Exactly." Madison's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "That's what I try to explain to clients. A logo isn't just a pretty picture. It's the first conversation your brand has with the world. It needs to say something meaningful." The man took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of his mug. "And what does this one say?" Madison shifted to face him more fully, her passion for her work overriding her exhaustion. Honor, resilience, hope. The gradient from deep blue to silver represents the transition from military service to civilian life, but also the idea that there's light ahead. The typography is strong, but not aggressive, confident without being intimidating. "You've thought of everything," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "How did you get into this kind of work?" "Art school, lots of student loans, and a healthy dose of naive optimism," Madison laughed. "I thought I'd be designing book covers or movie posters, but it turns out corporate branding pays the bills. Though I try to take on projects like this one whenever I can, something that actually matters." Thunder crashed outside, rattling the windows. Both of them glanced toward the storm, and Madison noticed her guest's jaw tighten slightly. "Still planning to drive in that?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. "I should probably wait a bit longer," he admitted. "I'm not usually so cautious, but this storm is something else." Madison studied his profile as he watched the rain streak down her windows. There was something almost aristocratic about his features, and now that she really looked at him, his hands were too soft for someone who delivered food for a living. No calluses, perfectly manicured nails, and was that a Rolex peeking out from under his sleeve? "Can I ask you something?" she said carefully. "And please, don't take this the wrong way, but you don't exactly look like a typical delivery driver." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "What does a typical delivery driver look like?" "Well, not like they just stepped out of a boardroom," Madison replied honestly. "The suit, the watch, the way you carry yourself, it's like you're used to being in charge." He was quiet for a long moment, swirling the coffee in his mug. "Maybe I'm between careers," he said finally. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." Madison sensed there was a story there, but something in his tone warned her not to push. Instead, she changed the subject. "What about you? Do you have any passions outside of food delivery?" His laugh was rich and warm. "You could say I'm in the business of building things, creating something from nothing, watching it grow." "That sounds amazing," Madison said wistfully. "There's something so satisfying about creating, isn't there? Whether it's a building or a brand, or even just a really good meal." "Speaking of which," he said, nodding toward the Tony's kitchen bag that still sat unopened on her counter. "Shouldn't you eat before your food gets cold?" Madison's cheeks reddened. "You're absolutely right. I got so caught up in playing hostess that I forgot I was starving." She started to get up, but he gently caught her wrist. "Stay put," he said. "Let me get it for you. It's the least I can do after you've been kind enough to let me wait out the storm." Before Madison could protest, he was up and moving toward her kitchen with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge. She watched, bemused, as he unpacked her dinner and arranged it on a plate with more care than most people put into five-star presentations. "You really don't have to serve me," Madison called out. "I'm perfectly capable of opening a takeout container." "I'm sure you are," he replied, returning with her perfectly plated meal and a set of actual silverware instead of the plastic utensils from the restaurant. "But humor me. When's the last time someone took care of you?" The question hit Madison unexpectedly hard. She prided herself on her independence, on being someone who didn't need taking care of. But sitting there, watching this mysterious stranger go out of his way to make sure she ate properly, she realized it had been a very long time since anyone had shown her this kind of simple, thoughtful consideration. "I can't remember," she admitted quietly. Something shifted in his expression, a softness that made her heart flutter. "That's a shame. Someone as giving as you deserves to be taken care of occasionally." Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. Whether from exhaustion or unexpected kindness, she wasn't sure. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, settling back beside her. "I know you work yourself to exhaustion for causes you believe in. I know you make incredible coffee and have excellent taste in art. I know you're the kind of person who invites strangers in from storms." "That last one might not be such a good thing," Madison said with a shaky laugh. "My mother always warned me about trusting people too easily." Smart woman. Though in this case, her daughter's instincts seemed pretty sound. As Madison finally began eating her dinner, she found herself studying her unexpected guest. The more time she spent with him, the more questions arose. Everything about him suggested wealth and status. Yet here he was, supposedly delivering food on a Tuesday night. His speech patterns were too refined, his mannerisms too polished. "You know," she said between bites, "I still don't know your name." He paused, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. For a split second, Madison could have sworn she saw panic flash across his features. "James," he said finally. "James Wilson." The hesitation was slight, but Madison caught it. She had always been good at reading people. It came with the territory of being a designer. You had to understand what made people tick to create brands that spoke to them. "Well, James Wilson," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "Thank you for the rescue mission, both from hunger and from the storm." "The pleasure's all mine, Madison Reynolds." Madison's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "I never told you my last name." This time, the panic in his eyes was unmistakable. James set down his coffee mug carefully, as if buying himself time to think. "The order," he said slowly. "It was on the receipt." Madison narrowed her eyes. "Food delivery apps only show first names and last initials for privacy reasons." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the city, but inside Madison's apartment, a different kind of tension was building. "Who are you, really?" Madison asked quietly. James ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disturbing its careful arrangement for the first time since he'd arrived. Madison watched the internal struggle play out across his features, strong jaw clenching, those impossibly blue eyes flickering between her face and the windows, as if calculating escape routes. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. What wasn't supposed to happen? Madison pressed, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. The fairy tale quality of the evening suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble about to burst. James stood abruptly, pacing toward her windows before turning back to face her. Meeting you. Caring about what you think of me. Sitting here drinking coffee like we're old friends when I'm living a complete lie. Madison's heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of lie? The kind where I'm not James Wilson, and I definitely don't deliver food for a living. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. God, I must sound insane. Try me, Madison said, surprising herself with her calm tone. After the year I've had, very little seems impossible anymore. James studied her for a long moment, as if trying to gauge whether she could handle the truth. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. Madison's eyes widened as she recognized the lock screen wallpaper, a photo from Forbes magazine, featuring a man who looked exactly like her mysterious delivery driver. My name is James Nathan Sterling, he said quietly. I'm the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. Madison's fork clattered to her plate. Sterling Enterprises was one of the largest investment firms in Chicago, with holdings in everything from real estate to technology. She'd actually designed a campaign proposal for one of their subsidiary companies 2 years ago, though they'd ultimately gone with a bigger agency. You're kidding, she breathed. I wish I were. James sank back onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. And before you ask why a billionaire CEO was dressed as a delivery driver, the answer is both simple and completely ridiculous. Madison waited, her mind reeling. The expensive suit, the perfect manners, the way he'd examined her apartment like he was evaluating an acquisition. It all made sense now. There's a board meeting tomorrow, James continued. Well, today, technically. Some of the members have been questioning my leadership, saying I'm out of touch with regular people, that I don't understand what it's like to work for a living or struggle to make ends meet. So you decided to play dress-up as a working-class hero. Madison's voice carried an edge she didn't bother to hide. James winced. It wasn't supposed to be like that. My assistant suggested I spend a few hours doing regular jobs to better understand our employees' experiences. Food delivery seemed harmless enough. Harmless, Madison repeated, standing up from the couch. Do you have any idea how condescending that sounds? I know how it sounds, James said quickly, rising to face her. And you're right to be angry. It was privileged and thoughtless and what? You thought you'd slum it with the little people for a few hours and suddenly understand the struggles of the working class? Madison's cheeks flushed with indignation. People aren't social experiments, James. Or should I call you Mr. Sterling now? Please don't, he said, his voice pained. And you're absolutely right. The whole thing was misguided from the start. But Madison, you have to understand. What? That you felt bad about lying to me? Madison crossed her arms, creating a barrier between them. How long were you planning to keep up this charade? Were you going to disappear after the storm and let me wonder what happened to the kind delivery driver who paid for my dinner? James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I hadn't thought that far ahead. After I met you, the plan kind of fell apart. Why? Madison demanded. What changed? You changed everything. James stepped closer, his eyes intense. Do you know what it's like to spend every day surrounded by people who only see dollar signs when they look at you? People who laugh at your jokes because you sign their paychecks, who agree with your opinions because they want something from you. Madison felt her anger waver slightly, but she held firm. So you decided to trick someone into having a genuine conversation with you. It wasn't supposed to be a trick, James said desperately. I was going to deliver the food and leave, but then I saw you working yourself to exhaustion for people you've never met. creating something beautiful for a cause that matters to you. And I just wanted to know more about the kind of person who does that. By lying about who you were. By being someone who could talk to you without all the baggage that comes with my name. James ran both hands through his hair now, completely destroying its perfect styling. When you looked at James Wilson, the delivery driver, you saw someone worth talking to. If I'd introduced myself as James Sterling, what would you have seen? Madison opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. If a billionaire CEO had shown up at her door at midnight, she probably would have assumed he was drunk, dangerous, or both. She certainly wouldn't have invited him in for coffee. That's not the point, she said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Isn't it? James moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. Madison, in the past 2 hours, I've felt more like myself than I have in years. You made me remember why I loved building things in the first place, why I wanted to create something meaningful instead of just profitable. Don't, Madison said, taking a step back. Don't try to make this about me inspiring you or whatever. You lied to me, James. About everything. Not everything, he said quietly. My appreciation for your work, my admiration for what you're doing for those veterans, the way I feel when I look at you, none of that was a lie. Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. How am I supposed to know what's real and what's part of your little social experiment? Because I'm telling you now, James said, his voice urgent. I'm trusting you with the truth, even though it means you'll probably never want to see me again. Thunder crashed outside, punctuating the tension in the room. Madison wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling cold despite her warm apartment. Why should I trust anything you say? She asked. For all I know, this whole confession is just another layer of the game. James flinched as if she'd slapped him. Because I have everything to lose by telling you this. My board would have a field day if they knew I'd compromised a business experiment because I developed feelings for someone I was supposed to be studying. Studying? Madison's voice went dangerously quiet. Is that what I was to you? A subject? No, James said firmly. You were supposed to be a delivery, nothing more. But you became something I never expected. What? James met her eyes, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. Hope. You became hope that there are still people in the world who care about more than money and status. People who create beauty for its own sake, who sacrifice for others without expecting anything in return. Madison felt her resolve wavering. The hurt and anger were still there, but underneath them was something else, the recognition that this man, regardless of his deception, had seen something in her work and in her that felt genuine. I need time to think, she said finally. This is too much, too fast. James nodded, pulling out his phone. I should call my driver. In this storm? Madison glanced toward the windows, where the rain was still coming down in sheets. You'll be lucky if anyone's willing to come out in this weather. I'll manage, James said, already dialing. I've imposed on your kindness enough for one night. As he spoke quietly into his phone, Madison found herself studying his profile again. The aristocratic features, the confident posture, even humbled and apologetic. James Sterling carried himself like a man accustomed to command. But there had been moments tonight when she'd glimpsed something else. Vulnerability, loneliness, a hunger for genuine connection that all the money in the world couldn't buy. 20 minutes, James said, ending his call. I'm sorry, Madison, for all of it. Madison nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Part of her wanted to throw him out immediately, to slam the door on this bizarre chapter of her life. But another part, the part that had spent the evening talking to someone who seemed to truly understand her work and her passion, wasn't ready to say goodbye. The storm's supposed to clear up by morning, she said quietly. Good, James replied. "You should get some sleep. You have a big presentation tomorrow." The fact that he remembered, that he still cared about her success despite everything, made Madison's chest tighten. "James?" He turned to look at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "Next time you want to understand how regular people live," she said softly. "Try asking instead of pretending." James's smile was sad but genuine. Noted. The 20 minutes stretched like hours, filled with awkward silence, punctuated only by the storm's gradual weakening. Madison busied herself cleaning up their coffee mugs and putting away her dinner, while James stood by the windows, watching for his driver's arrival. The easy intimacy they'd shared earlier had evaporated, replaced by the weight of his deception and her uncertainty. When headlights finally pierced the darkness below, James straightened his tie and turned toward her. "That's my ride." Madison nodded, following him to the door. Her hand hesitated on the deadbolt. "James?" "Yes?" "Why Tony's Kitchen? Of all the restaurants you could have chosen for your experiment, why that one?" A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "It was the only place still delivering this late. I figured if I was going to understand the service industry, I should experience the worst of it: long hours, bad weather, thankless customers. And instead, you found me." "Instead, I found you," he agreed softly. Madison unlocked the door, opening it to reveal the hallway beyond. The storm was indeed weakening, reduced to a steady patter against the windows rather than the violent assault of earlier. "Will you?" James started, then stopped. "Never mind." "What?" "I was going to ask if you'd consider seeing me again, but I don't have the right to ask that." Madison studied his face, noting the genuine regret etched in his features. "You're right. You don't." James nodded, the last of his hope flickering out. "Good luck with your presentation tomorrow. The Veterans Organization is lucky to have someone like you fighting for them." He stepped into the hallway, and Madison found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "James?" He turned back, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart clench. "If you had approached me as yourself," she said quietly, "as James Sterling, CEO, what would you have said?" James was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Honestly, I probably wouldn't have approached you at all. I would have assumed you'd want something from me: money, connections, opportunities. I've become very good at avoiding situations where people might want things. And now I know I was an idiot to think that avoiding genuine connection was protecting me from anything." James's smile was rueful. "It was just making me more alone." Madison felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the wall of hurt and anger she'd built. "Good night, James." "Good night, Madison. Thank you for the coffee, and for showing me what real passion looks like." As the elevator doors closed behind him, Madison remained in her doorway, staring at the spot where he'd stood. The silence of her apartment felt deafening after the evening's revelations. She locked the door and leaned against it, closing her eyes. Part of her felt like she'd just experienced the most romantic evening of her life, while another part felt manipulated and foolish. How could someone lie so convincingly while simultaneously seeming so genuine? Madison's phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, her heart leaped, thinking it might be James. Instead, it was her best friend Sarah asking about her deadline, still working on the veteran project. Long story. "Call you tomorrow." She set the phone aside and returned to her desk, staring at the non-profit design she'd been so passionate about just hours earlier. The work was good, she could see that objectively, but her enthusiasm felt dampened by the evening's events. Madison pulled up her laptop and tried to focus, but her mind kept wandering. James's reaction to her work had been so genuine, so insightful. He'd understood immediately what she was trying to convey, had seen the story behind the design. Whether he was James Wilson, the delivery driver, or James Sterling, the billionaire, that appreciation had felt real. But how could she trust her own judgment when she'd been so completely fooled? Madison worked until nearly 3 a.m, making final adjustments and preparing her presentation materials. When she finally crawled into bed, her mind was still churning, replaying every moment of the evening and analyzing every word James had spoken. She woke to bright sunlight streaming through her windows and the jarring sound of her alarm. 6 hours of sleep would have to be enough. The presentation was at 10, and she still needed to shower, dress professionally, and gather her materials. As Madison rushed through her morning routine, she found herself checking her phone repeatedly. No messages from James, which was probably for the best. She needed to focus on her work, not on the mysterious billionaire who had turned her evening upside down. The Veterans Organization was housed in a modest building on the south side of the city. Madison arrived 15 minutes early, using the extra time to set up her presentation and calm her nerves. The board members began filtering in around 9:50, a mix of retired military personnel, community leaders, and volunteers who had dedicated their time to helping homeless veterans. "Ms. Reynolds," said Colonel Patricia Martinez, the organization's director, "we're so grateful you could work with us on this project. Your reputation precedes you." Madison smiled, feeling some of her confidence return. "It's been an honor, Colonel Martinez. This cause is very close to my heart." As she began her presentation, Madison felt the familiar thrill of sharing work she was passionate about. The board members leaned forward, asking thoughtful questions, and nodding appreciatively as she explained her design choices. This was why she loved her job, the moment when visual communication bridged the gap between intention and understanding. The gradient from navy to silver represents the transition from military service to civilian life, Madison explained, echoing the words she'd shared with James the night before. But it also suggests hope, the idea that there's light ahead, even in the darkest moments. "Beautiful," murmured one of the board members. "It captures exactly what we're trying to achieve." The presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, and Madison felt a surge of satisfaction. Whatever confusion James Sterling had brought into her personal life, her professional instincts remained sound. As she packed up her materials, Colonel Martinez approached. "Ms. Reynolds, we'd like to discuss expanding this project. We've received some unexpected funding, and we're hoping to launch a much larger campaign." "That's wonderful news," Madison replied. "What kind of funding are we talking about?" "A very generous anonymous donation," Colonel Martinez said with a smile. "Enough to take this regional and really make an impact. Would you be interested in leading the design work for the entire campaign?" Madison's heart leaped. This was the kind of project that could define her career, the kind of work that actually mattered. "Absolutely. When do we start?" "Right away, if possible." Our anonymous benefactor was very specific about wanting to move quickly. They seem to have been quite impressed by your initial work. As Madison left the building, her mind was buzzing with possibilities. The expanded campaign would be a massive undertaking, but it was exactly the kind of challenge she thrived on. She pulled out her phone to call Sarah and share the good news. Instead, she found a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your presentation. I hope this new opportunity brings you as much joy as your work brought me last night." J. Madison stopped walking, staring at the message. The anonymous donation, the sudden expansion of the project, it couldn't be a coincidence. James Sterling had somehow orchestrated this, had found a way to support her work while respecting her request for space. Part of her was furious at the presumption. She didn't need his charity, didn't want to feel indebted to him. But another part recognized the gesture for what it was not, condescension or manipulation, but genuine appreciation for work he'd seen firsthand. Madison stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, pedestrians flowing around her as she struggled with conflicting emotions. James Sterling was clearly a man accustomed to solving problems with money, but this didn't feel like an attempt to buy her forgiveness. It felt like someone who had been genuinely moved by her passion, trying to help her make a bigger impact. She typed and deleted several responses, finally settling on something simple. "Thank you for believing in the work. The veterans deserve this support." His reply came almost immediately. "They deserve someone who fights for them the way you do. I hope you'll consider letting me support future projects, even if you never want to see me again." Madison stared at the message, her heart clenching. There was something heartbreaking about the idea of James Sterling, with all his wealth and power, believing that no one could want his company for its own sake. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed, "If you really want to support this cause, the organization could use volunteers for their weekend meal program. No money required, just time and genuine care." The response came quickly. "When and where?" Madison smiled despite herself. Maybe there was hope for James Sterling after all. Madison spent the next 2 days throwing herself into the expanded campaign design, working with an energy and focus that surprised even her. The anonymous donation had been substantial enough to fund a multi-city awareness campaign, complete with billboards, digital advertising, and community outreach programs. It was the kind of project that could change lives, and Madison was determined to make every element perfect. She was deep in color theory research when her phone rang Wednesday evening. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and Madison realized she'd been so absorbed in work that she'd forgotten to return her best friend's calls. "Finally!" Sarah's voice was equal parts relief and exasperation. "I was starting to think you'd been kidnapped by design sprites or something. You haven't answered a single text in 2 days." "Sorry," Madison said, saving her work and stretching her aching back. "I've been swamped with this new project. You remember the Veterans nonprofit I told you about? The one you were staying up all night to finish?" "Yeah, what about it?" "It got picked up for a massive expansion. Someone made an anonymous donation that's funding a multi-city campaign." Madison paused, debating how much to share about the events of Tuesday night. "It's complicated." "Complicated how? Did they ask you to design something inappropriate? Please tell me it's not one of those charities that's secretly a front for something shady." Madison laughed despite herself. "No, nothing like that. It's just, the donation might not be as anonymous as they're claiming." "Ooh, mystery benefactor," Sarah said with obvious interest. "Please tell me it's not some creepy rich guy trying to buy your affections through charitable giving." The accuracy of Sarah's guess made Madison wince. It's not exactly that simple. "Madison Reynolds, you are being deliberately vague, which means there's definitely a story here. Spill." Madison found herself telling Sarah everything, from the storm-delayed dinner order to James's confession to the suspicious timing of the donation. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or disapproval. "So let me get this straight," Sarah said when Madison finished. "A billionaire CEO pretended to be a delivery driver, spent the evening bonding with you over coffee and your work, confessed his real identity when you caught him in the lie, and then anonymously funded your project the next day. That's about the size of it. And you're conflicted because—" Madison blinked. "Because he lied to me for hours? Because he turned our conversation into some kind of social experiment? Because I have no idea what his real motivations are? Or," Sarah said thoughtfully, "because you had genuine feelings for delivery driver James, and now you're scared that billionaire James isn't the same person." "That's ridiculous," Madison protested, but even as she said it, she knew Sarah had hit uncomfortably close to the truth. "Is it? Maddie, you've been single for 2 years because every guy you meet either wants you to design their startup's logo for free or gets intimidated when they realize how successful you are. Then you meet someone who appreciates your work without wanting something from you. And it turns out he's rich enough that he definitely doesn't need anything from you. Except he does want something, Madison said. He wants to feel like a normal person having normal interactions. I was just a means to that end. Was you? Sarah challenged. Because from what you've told me, he seemed pretty devastated when you figured out who he was. That doesn't sound like someone who was just conducting an experiment. Madison was quiet for a moment, remembering the vulnerability in James's eyes when he'd confessed. I don't know what to think, Sarah. How do I trust someone who started our entire relationship with a lie? By looking at his actions since the truth came out, Sarah said pragmatically. He could have disappeared and pretended the whole thing never happened. Instead, he found a way to support something you care about without asking for anything in return. That says something about his character. Or it says he's really good at manipulation. Maddie, honey, I've watched you analyze people for years. Your instincts about character are usually spot on. What did your gut tell you about James when you were talking to him Tuesday night? Madison closed her eyes, remembering. That he was lonely. That he understood my work in a way most people don't. That he was genuinely interested in who I am as a person, not what I could do for him. And those feelings are invalidated because he lied about his job? They're complicated because I don't know which version of him was real. Maybe they both were, Sarah suggested. Maybe James the delivery driver was just James the billionaire without all the baggage that comes with the title. Madison sank back in her desk chair, staring at the veteran's campaign materials spread across her workspace. He texted me about volunteering at the weekend meal program. And I told him when and where to show up. Good, Sarah said firmly. Actions speak louder than words, and definitely louder than bank accounts. If he shows up and actually helps, maybe that tells you something about who he really is. After they hung up, Madison found herself staring at her phone, scrolling through the brief text exchange she'd had with James. His messages were careful, respectful, asking for nothing, beyond the chance to contribute to something meaningful. There was none of the presumption or entitlement she might have expected from someone of his wealth and status. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made staying in bed seem like the most reasonable option. Madison almost hoped James wouldn't show up, that he'd reveal his volunteering offer to be nothing more than empty words meant to impress her. It would make things simpler if she could write him off as just another wealthy person playing at caring about social causes. The Veterans Meal Program operated out of a community center in one of Chicago's less affluent neighborhoods. Madison arrived at 7 a.m. to help with setup, joining the regular volunteers in arranging tables and preparing serving stations. The work was familiar to her. She'd been volunteering here for 2 years, ever since her father had mentioned how much the program had helped some of his veteran friends. At 7:30, she was carrying folding chairs from the storage room when she heard Colonel Martinez's voice from the kitchen. "You must be our new volunteer. I'm Patricia Martinez, the program coordinator." "James Sterling," came the familiar voice in response. "Thank you for letting me help out." Madison's heart did an unexpected flip. He'd actually come. She set down the chairs and peered around the corner to see James standing in the kitchen doorway, looking entirely different from the polished CEO or even the suited delivery driver she'd met. He wore dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, and work boots that looked like they'd actually seen use. His hair was casual, slightly mussed, and his overall appearance suggested someone ready to get his hands dirty. "Have you done anything like this before?" Colonel Martinez was asking. "Not exactly," James admitted. "But I'm a quick learner, and I'm here to do whatever you need." "Honesty. I like that," the colonel said with approval. "Come on, I'll introduce you to the team." Madison ducked back behind the storage room door, not ready for the inevitable moment when James would see her. She needed a few more minutes to process the fact that he'd actually shown up, and to figure out how she felt about it. "Madison," Colonel Martinez's voice carried across the space. "Come meet our new volunteer." Taking a deep breath, Madison emerged from the storage room and walked toward the kitchen. James's eyes found hers immediately, and she saw surprise flicker across his features before settling into something warmer. "Madison," he said simply. "James." She kept her voice neutral, professional. "I didn't know you were volunteering here." "I hope that's all right," he said carefully. "You mentioned they could use help, and I wanted to contribute." Colonel Martinez looked between them with obvious curiosity. "You two know each other?" "We've met," Madison said before James could respond. "Recently." "Well, that's convenient," the colonel said. "Madison's one of our most experienced volunteers. She can show you the ropes, James." Madison saw James's slight smile at the unintended irony. Here she was, once again in a position to teach him about something he claimed to want to understand. "I'd appreciate that," James said, his eyes never leaving Madison's face. As the other volunteers finished their preparations, Madison found herself alone with James in the serving area. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and carefully contained emotions. "You came," Madison said finally. "I said I would." "A lot of people say things they don't mean." James met her gaze directly. "I'm trying not to be one of those people anymore." The next few hours passed in a carefully choreographed dance of proximity and distance. Madison showed James how to serve meals, how to interact with the veterans who came through the line, and how to clean up between rushes. He listened intently to her instructions, asked thoughtful questions, and threw himself into the work with a sincerity that surprised her. What struck Madison most was how naturally James seemed to connect with the veterans. He didn't talk down to them or treat them like charity cases. Instead, he listened to their stories, remembered their names, and treated each person with genuine respect. When an elderly veteran named Frank mentioned his struggle to find affordable housing, James didn't offer empty platitudes or immediate solutions. He simply listened and asked thoughtful questions about Frank's situation. "You're good at this," Madison said during a brief lull between lunch and dinner service. James looked up from the serving station he was cleaning. "It's not hard to treat people with dignity." "You'd be surprised how many volunteers struggle with that concept," Madison replied. "Some people come here to feel good about themselves, not to actually help." "And which category do I fall into?" Madison studied his face, noting the genuine uncertainty in his expression. "I'm still figuring that out." They worked side by side for the rest of the day, falling into an easy rhythm that felt both familiar and strange. This was a different James from either the mysterious delivery driver or the billionaire CEO. This version was quieter, more thoughtful, stripped of pretense in a way that made Madison's defenses waver. As they cleaned up after the dinner service, Colonel Martinez approached them with a warm smile. "James, I have to say, for someone with no experience, you've taken to this remarkably well." "I had a good teacher," James replied, glancing at Madison. "Well, we'd love to have you back anytime," the colonel said. "Madison, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Madison followed the colonel to her small office, wondering if somehow her complicated relationship with James had become obvious. "That young man is quite something," Colonel Martinez said without preamble. "Do you know much about his background?" "Some," Madison said carefully. "He mentioned he works in finance, but there's something about him that suggests more than that. The way he carries himself, the questions he asks, they're very insightful." The colonel paused. "I'm wondering if he might be interested in joining our board of directors. We could use someone with his obvious intelligence and genuine care for our mission." Madison nearly choked. James Sterling, billionaire CEO, being recruited for a non-profit board because he'd impressed them as a volunteer. The irony was almost too much to bear. "I think he'd be honored by the invitation," Madison managed, "though he might have some scheduling constraints with his regular job." "Of course. Well, would you mind asking him? You seem to know him better than the rest of us." When Madison returned to the main room, she found James stacking chairs with the same methodical precision he probably brought to boardroom negotiations. Most of the other volunteers had left, leaving them essentially alone in the large space. "Colonel Martinez wants to invite you to join the board of directors," Madison said without preamble. James's hand stilled on the chair he was moving. "She what?" "She's impressed with your insight and dedication. She thinks you'd be an asset to their leadership team." A slow smile spread across James's face, and Madison was struck by how genuinely pleased he looked. "She wants to recruit James the volunteer, not James the billionaire." "Exactly." Madison crossed her arms, studying him. "How does that feel?" "Like maybe I'm not completely hopeless at being a normal person," James said quietly. He finished stacking the chairs and turned to face her fully. "Madison, can I ask you something?" "Depends what it is." "Are you angry that I came here today?" Madison considered the question. "I was prepared to be. I thought you might be here to impress me, or to prove something about yourself. And now? Now, I think you genuinely care about this place and these people, which makes everything more complicated." James stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Why complicated?" "Because it's easier to dismiss someone who's shallow and selfish than someone who's actually trying to be better." Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. "I wanted you to be the kind of person I could write off, James. It would make this so much simpler." "And what would this be?" Madison gestured between them, struggling to find words for the electric tension that had been building all day. "Whatever this is, this connection that shouldn't exist but does anyway." James was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, could catch the faint scent of his cologne beneath the more practical smells of industrial cleaner and food service. "Madison," he said softly, "I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider having dinner with me? As myself this time. No pretense, no games. Just James Sterling asking Madison Reynolds if she'd like to get to know each other honestly." Madison's heart hammered against her ribs. Everything logical told her to say no, to maintain her distance from this man who had already turned her world upside down once. But looking into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, she found herself wanting to take the risk. "One dinner," she said finally. "Somewhere normal, not some 5-star restaurant where the servers know your name and the wine costs more than my rent." James's smile was radiant. "I know just the place." 2 nights later, Madison found herself standing outside a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, checking her reflection in the darkened window and wondering if she'd lost her mind. She'd chosen her outfit carefully casual enough to show she wasn't trying to impress him, but flattering enough that she felt confident. A simple black dress, comfortable flats, and her grandmother's vintage pearl earrings. James was already waiting at a corner table when she arrived, and Madison felt her breath catch. He wore dark slacks and a blue button-down that brought out his eyes. But what struck her most was how relaxed he looked. This wasn't the polished CEO from the magazines, or even the careful volunteer from Saturday. This was simply a man waiting for a woman he was interested in getting to know better. "You found it," he said, standing as she approached. "GPS is a wonderful thing," Madison replied, accepting the chair he pulled out for her. "Though I have to admit, I'm surprised you know about places like this." James settled across from her, his smile self-deprecating. "Believe it or not, I didn't grow up wealthy. This was actually one of my favorite restaurants in college, back when I was living on ramen and scholarships." The admission surprised Madison. "I guess I assumed you were born with a silver spoon." "More like a plastic spork," James said with a laugh. My dad was a high school math teacher. My mom was a nurse. They worked themselves to exhaustion to give me opportunities they never had. What changed? A combination of hard work, good timing, and probably more luck than I deserved, James said simply. I developed some investment software in graduate school that ended up being worth a lot more than I expected. Their conversation was interrupted by a server who clearly recognized James, though she was professional enough not to make a scene. As they ordered, Madison noted that James chose modestly, eschewing the more expensive options in favor of simple pasta dishes. Can I ask you something? Madison said after the server left. Anything. Why the charade Tuesday night? I mean, really, what were you hoping to accomplish? James was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Honestly, I was tired of being lonely. I know that sounds ridiculous coming from someone who has every material advantage, but wealth has a way of isolating you. People either want something from you, or they're intimidated by you. Genuine connections become almost impossible. So you decided to pretend to be someone else. I decided to be someone else. For a few hours, I wanted to experience what it felt like to be judged on my actions and words, rather than my bank account. James met her eyes. What I didn't expect was to meet someone who would make me want to be a better version of myself. Madison felt warmth bloom in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. How do I know this isn't just another performance? How do I know you're being genuine now? You don't, James said simply. All I can do is be honest about my intentions and hope my actions prove my sincerity over time. I'm not asking you to trust me completely tonight, Madison. I'm just asking for the chance to earn that trust. Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics: Madison's work, James's genuine interest in the nonprofit sector, their shared love of old movies, and independent bookstores. As the evening progressed, Madison found herself relaxing despite her reservations. This version of James felt authentic in a way that made her earlier anger seem almost petty. Can I ask about your parents? Madison said as they shared tiramisu. You mentioned them earlier, but then moved on pretty quickly. James's expression softened with obvious affection. They're incredible people. Still married after 35 years. Still living in the same house where I grew up. My success has allowed them to retire comfortably, but they refuse to let me buy them anything extravagant. They're proud of what I've accomplished, but they also keep me grounded. Do they know about your delivery driver experiment? James laughed, shaking his head. My mother would lecture me for an hour about honesty being the foundation of all relationships. She'd probably like you, actually. She's always telling me I need to find someone who challenges me intellectually and keeps me humble. Smart woman. The smartest. She used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with what they've been given. Madison studied James's face as he spoke about his mother, noting the genuine love and respect in his expression. It was another piece of the puzzle that made up this complicated man, another reason to believe that his interest in her and in causes like the Veterans Program might be genuine. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, James hesitated. Madison, I know this is probably presumptuous, but would you like to take a walk? It's a beautiful night, and I'm not quite ready for this evening to end. Madison looked outside at the clear sky and twinkling city lights. Despite all her reservations, despite the voice in her head warning her to be careful, she found herself nodding. Just a walk, she said. Nothing more. Just a walk, James agreed. But the warmth in his smile suggested he was as reluctant as she was to let the evening end. They walked through the quiet streets of Little Italy, their footsteps echoing softly on the sidewalk. The neighborhood had a timeless quality at night, with warm light spilling from restaurant windows and the distant sound of laughter from outdoor cafes. Madison found herself walking closer to James than strictly necessary, drawn by the easy conversation and the unexpected comfort of his presence. "Thank you," James said suddenly as they paused at a crosswalk. "For what?" "For giving me a chance to explain myself, for not dismissing me completely after Tuesday night." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I know I hurt you with my deception, and I know trust isn't something I can buy or demand. The fact that you're here tonight means more to me than you know." Madison felt her carefully constructed walls wavering. "James, I need you to understand something. I've worked very hard to build a life where I'm valued for my skills and my character, not for what I can provide to someone else. When you lied to me, it felt like you were reducing me to a case study." "You were never a case study," James said firmly. "You were the most genuine person I'd encountered in years, and I was terrified that if you knew who I really was, you'd see me differently." "How?" "The way everyone else does, as a collection of assets rather than a person, as someone whose value is measured in dollars rather than character." They resumed walking, turning onto a quieter street lined with brownstones. Madison considered his words, understanding for the first time the burden that came with extreme wealth. "It must be lonely," she said quietly. "It is. Or it was. Until I met you." Madison stopped walking. "James, you can't put that kind of pressure on me. I can't be responsible for curing your loneliness." "That's not what I meant," James said quickly. "I don't expect you to fix anything about my life. What I mean is that knowing you has reminded me what it feels like to connect with someone authentically. Whether or not you choose to see me again, that's a gift I'll always be grateful for." They had reached a small park, empty except for the occasional jogger and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Madison settled onto a bench, and James joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Can I tell you something?" Madison said, staring up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. "Anything. When I was growing up, my dad used to tell me stories about the people he served with. Men and women who had given everything for their country, only to come home and struggle to find their place in civilian life. He always said that the true measure of a society was how it treated its most vulnerable members." "Is that why the Veterans Project means so much to you?" Madison nodded. "My dad was one of the lucky ones. He had support, education benefits, a family that understood what he'd been through. But so many others don't have those advantages. When I can use my skills to help organizations that serve them, it feels like I'm honoring his service and theirs." James was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like an incredible man." "He is. He'd probably like you, actually, despite your unconventional introduction to my life." "Why?" Madison smiled. "Because you showed up at the meal program and actually worked. Because you listened to the veterans' stories without trying to fix everything or throw money at their problems. Because you treated them with dignity. That's just basic human decency. You'd be surprised how uncommon basic human decency is, especially among people with resources." Madison turned to look at him. "I've watched wealthy donors tour the facility like it's a zoo, taking photos for their social media without ever actually engaging with the people they're supposedly helping. And you thought I might be one of those people. I was prepared for you to be. It would have been easier if you were." James shifted on the bench to face her more fully. "Madison, I want you to know that regardless of what happens between us personally, I'm committed to supporting the Veterans Program, not because I'm trying to impress you, but because you've shown me how much good work they're doing." "Careful," Madison said with a slight smile. "Colonel Martinez is serious about that board position." "Would it surprise you to know I'm actually considering it?" Madison blinked. "Really?" I've spent years focused on generating profit, on building wealth for its own sake. But spending time at the meal program, seeing the impact of real service, it's made me realize I want to do something that matters beyond my bottom line. That's a big change from running an investment firm. Not a change, James corrected. An addition. I'm good at what I do, and that success gives me the resources to support causes I care about. But I want to be more than just a checkbook. Madison studied his profile in the soft park lighting. You know, when you talk like that, I can almost forget how we met. Maybe that's the point, James said softly. Maybe the man you met Tuesday night, the one who was genuinely interested in your work and your passion, maybe that's who I really am, underneath all the complications. And maybe the woman who invited a stranger in from a storm, maybe she's who I am when I stop overthinking everything. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the occasional car pass by and listening to the distant sounds of the city. Madison felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since Tuesday night, as if the conversation had finally allowed her to reconcile the different versions of James she'd encountered. I should probably get home, Madison said eventually, though she made no move to leave the bench. Probably, James agreed, also remaining seated. I have an early meeting tomorrow about the campaign expansion. How's that going? Madison smiled. Really well, actually. The anonymous donation has allowed us to dream bigger than we ever thought possible. We're looking at billboard placements, digital campaigns, even a documentary component. That's incredible. I'm sure your father would be proud. I think he would be. Madison finally stood, brushing invisible lint from her dress. James? Yes? Thank you for tonight, for being honest, for listening, for not trying to overwhelm me with grand gestures or expensive gifts. James rose as well, his smile warm and genuine. Thank you for giving me a second chance. As they walked back toward the restaurant where Madison had parked her car, she found herself dreading the end of the evening. The time they'd spent together had felt natural, comfortable, in a way that surprised her. When they reached her car, James made no move to invite himself to continue the evening elsewhere, for which Madison was grateful. She wasn't ready for that level of complication yet. Madison, James said as she unlocked her car door. Yes? Would you consider seeing me again? No pressure, no expectations. Just the chance to continue getting to know each other honestly. Madison looked into his eyes, seeing hope tempered with respect for her autonomy. I'd like that, she said softly. Really? Really. But slowly, James. I need time to process all of this, to figure out how I feel about everything that's happened. Of course, whatever pace you're comfortable with. Madison impulsively rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, catching the faint scent of his cologne and the warmth of his skin. Good night, James Sterling. Good night, Madison Reynolds. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Madison found herself smiling despite all the complications that lay ahead. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe she was overthinking things. Maybe sometimes the best relationships were the ones that began in the most unexpected ways. Her phone buzzed with a text as she pulled into her parking garage. Thank you for a perfect evening. Sweet dreams. Jay Madison saved the message and headed upstairs to her apartment, feeling lighter than she had in days. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about James and their complicated beginning. But tonight, she was content to hold on to the memory of easy conversation, genuine laughter, and the possibility that something real might be growing between them. After all, the best love stories often began with the most unlikely circumstances. And if she was being honest with herself, Madison was curious to see where this particular story might lead. 3 weeks later, Madison was putting the finishing touches on the Veterans Campaign when her phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen, and she felt the familiar flutter of excitement that his calls had begun to evoke. "Hi," she answered, unable to keep the smile out of her voice. "Hi yourself. How's the campaign coming along?" "Almost finished. The billboard designs are approved, the digital components are ready to launch, and the documentary crew starts filming next week." Madison leaned back in her desk chair, stretching her arms above her head. "I have to admit, having unlimited resources makes this job a lot more satisfying." "I'm glad to hear it. Listen, I was wondering if you might be free this Saturday. There's something I'd like to show you." "What kind of something?" "A surprise? Trust me?" Madison hesitated. Over the past 3 weeks, she and James had seen each other 6 times: dinner dates, coffee meetings, another volunteer session at the Veterans Center. Each encounter had deepened her understanding of who he really was beneath the wealth and status. But surprises still made her nervous. "Will I need a passport?" she asked finally. James laughed. "No international travel required. Just dress comfortably and be ready for some walking." "Okay," Madison said. Decision made. "But if this involves helicopters or private jets, I'm out." "No helicopters, I promise." Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn sunlight that made Chicago look like a postcard. Madison chose jeans, comfortable boots, and a warm sweater, then spent longer than necessary, debating whether to bring a jacket. The weather was perfect, but she had no idea what James had planned. He arrived precisely on time, driving a modest sedan rather than the Bentley she'd expected. Madison raised an eyebrow as she got into the passenger seat. "Borrowed car?" she asked. "My car," James replied with amusement. "I know it's shocking, but I don't actually drive a diamond-encrusted limousine to work every day." "The Bentley on Tuesday night. Company car, brought by my driver, because I'd been drinking and wasn't stupid enough to drive in a storm." James merged into traffic, his movements confident, but not aggressive. "I actually prefer driving myself when I can. It's one of the few times I feel completely normal." They drove through the city and into the suburbs, past strip malls and residential neighborhoods that grew progressively more upscale. Madison tried to guess their destination, but James had chosen a route that revealed nothing about their final location. "Can I ask you something?" Madison said, as they stopped at a red light. "Always." "Do you ever miss it? Being anonymous, I mean. Being able to go places without being recognized, or having people want things from you?" James considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But I've realized that what I really missed wasn't anonymity, it was authenticity. The chance to be myself without all the baggage that comes with my name and reputation. And now? Now I'm learning that it's possible to be authentic, even when people know who you are. It just requires being more selective about who you spend time with." The light turned green, and they continued driving until James turned into the parking lot of what appeared to be a construction site. Madison looked around in confusion at the concrete barriers and partially constructed buildings. "James, what is this place?" "Come on," he said, getting out of the car. "I'll show you." They approached a large sign that read, "Sterling Foundation Community Center, opening spring 2024. Madison's eyes widened as she read the smaller text detailing the planned amenities: job training facilities, mental health services, transitional housing assistance, and a veterans resource center. "James," she breathed, "what is this?" "It's what I've been working on for the past 6 months, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and nervousness. "A place where people who need support can find it without judgment or bureaucracy. The Veterans Program gave me the idea, but this will serve anyone who needs a fresh start." Madison walked closer to the sign, reading the detailed plans for the facility. "This is incredible. The scope of services, the thoughtful design, it's exactly what communities like this need." "I was hoping you'd think so," James said, pulling out his phone to show her architectural renderings. Because I'd like you to design the branding and signage for the entire facility. Madison stared at him. James, this is a massive project, the kind of thing major design firms compete for. And I'm offering it to you, if you want it. Why me? I mean, I'm honored, but you could hire anyone. James put his phone away and looked directly into her eyes. Because you understand what this kind of work means to people. Because you see beyond the surface to the real human need. Because when you design something, you're not just making it look good. You're making it welcoming, dignified, hopeful. Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. This would be career-defining work. I hope so. You deserve to have your talent recognized on this scale. They spent the next hour walking the construction site, with James explaining his vision for each area of the facility. His passion for the project was evident in every word, and Madison found herself falling a little more in love not just with the man, but with his dream of making a real difference in people's lives. There's something else, James said as they returned to the car. The Sterling Foundation Board wants to offer you a permanent position as Director of Creative Strategy. You'd oversee branding and communications for all our initiatives. Madison stopped walking. Are you serious? Completely. The salary would be competitive, with major corporate positions, but the work would be focused entirely on non-profit and community service projects. Things that matter. James, I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. The Foundation Board meets next Thursday, if you're interested in hearing more details. As they drove back to the city, Madison's mind raced with possibilities. The opportunity James was offering represented everything she'd dreamed of, the chance to use her skills for meaningful work while building a sustainable career. Can I ask you something personal? Madison said as they neared her neighborhood. Of course. Is this offer connected to your feelings for me? Because if it is, I need to know. James was quiet for several minutes, and Madison appreciated that he was giving the question the serious consideration it deserved. My feelings for you made me realize how much I value authenticity and genuine passion, he said finally. But the job offer is based entirely on your talent and the quality of your work. The Foundation Board reviewed your portfolio without knowing about our personal relationship. They were unanimous in wanting to recruit you. And if things don't work out between us personally, then you'd still be the most qualified person for the position, and I'd be professional enough to separate business from personal feelings. James glanced at her as they stopped at a red light. Madison, I care about you too much to jeopardize your career over our relationship, whatever that relationship becomes. When they reached Madison's building, she found herself reluctant to end the day. The community center project had sparked her imagination in ways she hadn't expected, and the job offer represented an opportunity she'd never dared to dream of. Thank you, she said, as James walked her to the building entrance. For showing me the center, for thinking of me for the position, for understanding how important this kind of work is to me. Thank you for caring enough to make it matter, James replied. Madison looked up at him, noting the way the afternoon sunlight brought out the gold in his eyes. Without overthinking it, she rose on her toes and kissed him softly, briefly, but with enough warmth to convey her growing feelings. I'll call you after the board meeting, she said against his lips. I'll be waiting, James murmured back. As Madison watched him drive away, she realized that her life was about to change in ways she'd never anticipated. The scared, guarded woman who had opened her door to a mysterious delivery driver 3 weeks ago was ready to take risks she'd never considered before. Walking up to her apartment, Madison felt lighter than she had in years. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters led to the most extraordinary possibilities. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, a stranger delivering food in a storm turned out to be someone who could help you deliver your dreams instead. She pulled out her phone and texted James. "Thursday can't come soon enough. Thank you for believing in me." His response came immediately. "Thank you for making me believe in myself." Madison's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her blazer for the third time in the mirror. Thursday had arrived faster than she'd expected, and the Sterling Foundation board meeting that would determine her professional future was in 2 hours. She'd spent the previous 3 days preparing a presentation that showcased not just her design skills, but her understanding of how visual communication could amplify the impact of nonprofit work. The Foundation's offices occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building, with panoramic views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. Madison announced herself to the receptionist, trying to project confidence despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Ms. Reynolds." A woman in her 50s approached with a warm smile. "I'm Catherine Wells, the Foundation's executive director. We're so pleased you could join us today." Madison followed Catherine through hallways lined with photographs documenting the Foundation's work around the world. Clean water projects in rural communities, educational programs in underserved neighborhoods, disaster relief efforts that had touched thousands of lives. The scope was breathtaking and slightly intimidating. "I should mention," Catherine said as they approached the conference room, "that James won't be participating in today's discussion. He recused himself to avoid any appearance of impropriety, given your personal relationship." Madison felt a flutter of panic. She'd been counting on James's familiar presence to calm her nerves. Of course, that makes sense. The conference room held 8 people around a polished mahogany table, representing diverse backgrounds in business, nonprofit work, and community leadership. Madison recognized several faces from Chicago's social and philanthropic circles, including a former mayor and the president of a major hospital system. "Ms. Reynolds," Catherine began after introductions were complete, "we've reviewed your portfolio extensively, and we're impressed by both the quality of your work and your commitment to meaningful causes. Today, we'd like to hear your vision for how design and communication can advance our mission." Madison launched into her presentation, feeling her confidence grow as she spoke about the power of visual storytelling to create emotional connections between donors and causes. She showed examples of her work for the Veterans Organization, explaining how thoughtful branding could dignify rather than patronize the people being served. "One of the biggest challenges in nonprofit communication," Madison explained, "is avoiding what I call poverty tourism, the tendency to exploit difficult circumstances for emotional manipulation. Effective design tells the story of resilience and hope, not just need." The board members nodded appreciatively, asking thoughtful questions about methodology, timeline, and resource allocation. Madison found herself relaxing into the discussion, energized by their genuine interest in creating positive change. "Let's talk about the Community Center project," said Dr. Sarah Chen, a board member who ran a network of free clinics. "How would you approach branding a facility that serves such diverse populations?" Madison had anticipated this question. "The key is finding universal themes while respecting individual dignity. The branding needs to feel welcoming without being condescending, professional without being intimidating. I'd recommend extensive community input sessions to ensure the final design reflects the actual needs and preferences of the people who will use the space." "And how do you see this position evolving over time?" asked Robert Harrison, a retired nonprofit executive. "I envision building a comprehensive communications department that can support all of the Foundation's initiatives. Not just design, but strategic messaging, community outreach, and impact measurement. Visual communication should be integrated into every aspect of how we connect with the communities we serve." The presentation concluded to enthusiastic questions and discussion. Madison felt cautiously optimistic as Catherine walked her back to the elevator. "That was outstanding," Catherine said. "You'll hear from us by tomorrow afternoon." but I can tell you that the response was overwhelmingly positive. Madison thanked her and made her way back to street level, her mind buzzing with the possibilities the position represented. Whether or not she got the job, the experience had clarified something important. She was ready for work that challenged her in new ways. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," she replied. "They said, I'll hear something tomorrow." The response came quickly. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you for putting yourself out there." Madison smiled as she walked toward her car. Over the past month, she'd come to appreciate James's ability to support her ambitions without trying to control or influence the outcome. It was a maturity she hadn't expected from someone who was used to getting his way in business. That evening, Madison met Sarah for dinner at their usual spot, a cozy wine bar near Sarah's apartment. She filled her best friend in on the board meeting while they shared appetizers and a bottle of Pinot Noir. "So let me get this straight," Sarah said, twirling pasta around her fork. "The mysterious billionaire who pretended to be a delivery driver has offered you your dream job, working on projects that could actually change people's lives?" "That's the simplified version, yes." "And you're worried because—" Madison sighed. "Because I'm not sure I can separate my feelings for James from my professional judgment. What if I'm only being considered because of our relationship? What if I take the job and we break up, and then everything becomes incredibly awkward?" "Maddie, you've been overthinking this since the beginning," Sarah said gently. "From everything you've told me, the board made their decision based on your work, not on James's recommendation. And even if your relationship doesn't work out, you'd still be doing meaningful work that you're passionate about. But what if you stopped catastrophizing and started celebrating the fact that someone recognizes your talent?" Sarah interrupted. "You've been wanting an opportunity like this for years. Don't talk yourself out of it because of worst-case scenarios that may never happen." Madison knew her friend was right, but accepting the position felt like taking a leap of faith that terrified her. She'd built her career on careful planning and gradual progress. This felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping someone had remembered to pack a parachute. "There's something else," Madison admitted. "I think I'm falling in love with him." Sarah's face broke into a grin. "Finally! I was wondering when you'd admit that to yourself." "It's terrifying," Madison continued. "I've never felt this way about anyone before. He's intelligent and kind, and genuinely committed to making a difference in the world. But he's also a billionaire with a completely different life experience than mine." "So? You're a successful, talented woman with her own accomplishments. You're not some starry-eyed girl being swept off her feet by wealth and status." "But what if that's exactly what I am?" Madison's voice was small, vulnerable. "What if I'm kidding myself about being able to handle his world?" Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Madison's hand. "Honey, from what you've told me, James isn't asking you to handle his world. He's asking if he can be part of yours. There's a difference." The next afternoon, Madison was in her apartment working on a client project when her phone rang. Catherine Wells's name appeared on the screen, and Madison's heart rate immediately accelerated. "Ms. Reynolds, I have wonderful news. The board has voted unanimously to offer you the position of Director of Creative Strategy for the Sterling Foundation." Madison sank into her desk chair, overwhelmed by relief and excitement. "That's incredible. Thank you so much. We're prepared to offer a starting salary of $120,000, plus full benefits and a generous budget for professional development. You'd start in 3 weeks, which would give you time to wrap up your current commitments." After discussing logistics and next steps, Madison hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. In the span of a month, her life had been completely transformed. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined being offered a position this prestigious, working on projects this meaningful. Her first instinct was to call James, but she hesitated. This was her moment, her achievement, and she wanted to savor it independently before sharing it with anyone else. Instead, she called her father. "Dad, I have some news." "What kind of news? You sound excited." Madison told him about the job offer, about the community center project, about the opportunity to design communications for programs that would help veterans like the men he'd served with. Her father listened without interruption, and when she finished, there was a long pause. "Honey," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "I couldn't be prouder of you. This is exactly the kind of work that changes lives. I keep thinking about the stories you used to tell me about the guys who came home and couldn't find their footing. Maybe this can help people like that." "It absolutely will. And Madison, your mother would have been so proud to see you using your talents this way." After they hung up, Madison sat quietly for several minutes, thinking about her mother's belief that everyone had a responsibility to use their gifts in service of others. This position would allow her to honor that philosophy in ways she'd never imagined possible. Finally, she picked up her phone and called James. "Congratulations," he said before she could speak. "Catherine called to let me know you accepted." "I haven't actually accepted yet," Madison said. "I wanted to talk to you first." "About what?" Madison took a deep breath. "About us. About what this means for our relationship. About whether I'm making this decision for the right reasons. And what conclusion have you reached?" "That I want this job because it's the opportunity of a lifetime. That I care about you because you are an incredible man who sees the best in people and wants to make the world better. And that I'm tired of being afraid of taking risks when the potential rewards are this significant." "So you're accepting the position?" "I'm accepting the position." "And James?" "Yes?" "I'd like to take you up on that dinner invitation you mentioned last week. Somewhere nice this time. I think we have some celebrating to do." James's laughter was warm and rich through the phone. "I know just the place, though I should warn you, they probably do know my name there." "I think I can handle a little notoriety," Madison said with a smile, "as long as you're worth it. I guess we'll find out together." What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and on a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.